planet for us to enjoy. We are borrowing the future of next generation. Hence, it's our moral duty that we should leave enough resources by its judicious use through a sustainable development model which supports conservation of resources and healthy environment for future generations. While we are looking forward to a healthy, fast-growing economy, it is equally important that economic growth and industrialization remain sustainable. Therefore, today, one of the biggest challenges before us is to model a sustainable development. My dear friends, our country is bestowed with a unique knowledge, wealth of qualified professionals, and it gets richer every year in this regard. As a society, we traditionally valued and nurtured the knowledge-building activity. Knowledge age seeks rewards, ideas, irrespective of where they originate and reside. Here, I would like to mention that with the joy of your success, ISL will join with you to celebrate it. I wish you a wisdom, success, and true sense of fulfillment of your cherished ideals and goals. Congratulations, and thank you very much.
Certainly noble ideals encompassed within that exhortation and sincerely expressed as well. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Which brings us now to our guest of honor. He has been the first and founder dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture at the University of Moratuwa. And interestingly too, he was also the first professor of electronic engineering in Sri Lanka's university system. And of course, he has served in various capacities in academia and almost too numerous to mention. But notably, he's a chartered engineer and a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, Sri Lanka. And his research earned him a SLAS Merit Award. That's the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science, of which he was general president at one time, and was also the chairman of the Institution of Electrical Engineers, or IET, the Sri Lanka branch. Professor Pereira was conferred the titular honor Vidya Jyoti, that was in 1993, in recognition of outstanding scientific and technological achievements, including original research. And relevant too in this context is that he has been the recipient of several awards for his inventions, and in 2016, which is just last year, he received a silver medal at the Geneva International Awards for Inventions. And he's also been accorded the status of eminent engineer by the Institution of Engineers of Sri Lanka. And he has served for more than 10 years as the secretary, as was mentioned by President-elect during her speech, the Secretary Minister of Power and Energy, which overlooked at that time the entire energy scenario, that's electricity, petroleum, gas, and biofuels. And Professor K.K.Y.W. Pereira is an emeritus professor of the University of Moratuwa and the Chancellor as well. So let's invite him now to address this audience on this special occasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was introduced as past president, but thinking of the time I was president, I think I should have been introduced as an ancient president, because it was about 30 years ago that I was president of the Institution of Engineers Sri Lanka. Then Engineer Jayavilal Megoda, president of the Institution of Engineers Sri Lanka, distinguished chief guest Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, members of the Council of IESL, members of the academic and non-academic staff of IESL, members and graduates of the IESL, honored guests, engineers inducted today to the Chartered Engineer status, engineers, energetic graduates of today, award winners and scholarship winners, parents and well-wishers, ladies and gentlemen. President Engineer Jawaharlal Megoda, thank you for inviting me as the guest of honor and requesting me to address this very important audience. Today is a memorable day for all of us, particularly to those receiving graduation certificates and to members being inducted to Chartered Engineer status. Also, I should mention award winners and scholarship winners who are here. I offer my sincere congratulations to you. You are great achievers. You have brought credit not only to yourself, but also to the ISL itself. ISL means Institution of Engineers Sri Lanka itself. You have demonstrated your capability and we are proud of your achievements. ISL itself can be happy of growing up such a large number of graduates and chartered engineers able to shoulder engineering work at a high level of responsibility. Some of you may choose to work as academics or researchers. Others, I think the majority, will be practicing engineers or entrepreneurs and leading and helping the unprecedented development going on in the country or serving in other parts of the globe. We are aware that ISL charge fees for providing engineering education and training to those graduating today, but that was just to cover the cost. I congratulate the ISL for the great opportunity provided to the graduates of today who may come from several categories. Free education in engineering conducted through Sri Lanka's state university system is undoubtedly very good. Nevertheless, there are several gaps which need to be catered to, and the ISL has been trying hard to fill these gaps. Firstly, the total admitted annually to state universities for engineering is only a minor fraction of those who are qualifying at GC advanced level examinations. Secondly, Sri Lanka needs many more well-educated and competent engineers to cater to the vast growth that is taking place and is anticipated. Further, students who are unable to gain admission to state universities but are qualified and keen need an alternative avenue to qualify. Also, there is another category who need to learn while learning and earning in order to support themselves and their family. And they enter technically oriented job markets and wish to follow part-time courses with the aim of ultimately qualifying as engineers. I observe that the ISL has been endeavoring hard to at least partially fulfill the above needs in an economic manner. Today's graduation marks the success of the above efforts. The learning of an engineer does not come to an end with the graduation. In order to become a fully fledged professional engineer, it is necessary to achieve the status of a chartered engineer. This requires many years of effort and responsible experience as an engineer, following the ethics of the profession laid down by the ISL and clearing the professional reviews. Importance of ethics is emphasized because it is in the book that is distributed today. The code of ethics is there. And I am glad to understand there are more than 280 achievers who have cleared the barriers which are laid down, such as professional reviews and so on, and carrying on responsible service and achieving the level of chartered engineer status. My congratulations to you for clearing the hurdles and reaching this remarkable milestone. Your creativity and active participation in the country's development process is much needed now and in the future. My congratulations to the ISL itself for paving the way and actively helping in the development of professional engineers. It would be good for the graduates and chartered engineers to give back to the country which supported you something that your capability can deliver to help its people. I do not emphasize on direct financial assistance. Even in your day-to-day work, if you work towards efficiency in whatever work that you are performing, in general it will help to cut cost, to reduce waste, and thereby improve the living of others and move towards sustainability. If you have a choice in your work or employment, it is better to select areas of benefit to people. Avoid destruction-oriented employment, such as in the manufacturing of weapons for destruction. At your level of achievement, you can think critically in terms of fundamentals so as not to get deceived by advertisements and gimmicks. You can also influence others to think and analyze critically. For example, consider internal and external cleanliness advocated by most religions. To satisfy this requirement, external cleanliness, clean clothes are preferred and washing of clothes is necessary. Often sellers' advertisements insist on white and polished clothes. The white and polished qualities are not necessities. They are advertising gimmicks by companies. In Sinhala, they say, Soda, Sudata Soda Opeta. It's good to have them like that, but the white and polished qualities are not necessities, but are in fact wants created in the minds of people. Cleanliness is necessary, but not the white and polished. The result of this insisting on white is tons and tons of bleaching powder and other chemicals which are released to streams and rivers all over the country, polluting these. Only a very few, in fact, are concerned of such large-scale island-wide environmental pollution because everybody is brainwashed or conditioned by the created want to advertise good looks than the need for simple cleanliness. Not everyone will agree with the example that I have given above. Some may agree, some may not agree. But the essence is that you are clever enough to look at the world critically. You have reached the level of intelligence and capability to look at the world critically, look at the world on your own, and when you are confident of something, you are capable of becoming change agents, agents who can do change because of your level of attainment, who can influence others towards sustainable and good living. At least a few others will imitate you. The good you do to others is the way for your long-lasting happiness. I wish you a successful career and long-lasting happiness. Thank you.
Thank you too, Professor Pereira, for those insights that were delivered to this audience and also the underscoring of the responsibility that goes with being qualified and serving as a professional, not least caring for the environment. Now, we would like to invite upon Professor Pereira to be the presenter of certificates to IESL engineering graduates, and he will be in the company of Engineer Jaibilal Migora, President, IESL. So this is the conferment of the award of certificates to the engineering graduates of IESL. So we shall be calling the names, and the recipients will no doubt arrive on stage in order. In civil engineering, Ms. M.D.M. Sharoni. K. Ainkaran. Ms. W.A.P.C. Wickramasinghe. Ms. W.G.N.D. Veligepala. Ms. S.P.L. Devaraja. D. Yasodaran, C. Dasanayaka, Ms. C. S. K. Hewanayaka, M. A. K. M. Naushad, P. Prahladan, N. W. R. Prabhat, SMDSD Tilakasiri. I should have said RMIO Rajapaksha. And then SMSD Tilakasiri. Ms. HWR Samanmali. Mr. IGSU Abedira. Ms. BC Abenayaka. And Ms. DMU Dharmapali, all in civil engineering. And our many thanks to our guest of honor, Professor Pereira, and we'll invite him to resume his seat. And thank you too, President IESL. Which brings us now to the address by our chief guest, who does not claim to be an engineer, but he's an economist. Indeed, he is an alumnus of Cambridge University in the United Kingdom, where he read for his Masters in Economics, and then the University of Sussex, where he read for his doctorate. And he has served his people well, about 30 years of experience he has in policy making and providing economic advisory services, both at the macroeconomic and structural levels, at national and intergovernmental levels. And that was particularly when he served with the Commonwealth Secretariat, serving in different divisions, and he was Deputy Director with Secretary General's Office and was subsequently Interim Director, Social Transformation and Transformation Programs Division with the Commonwealth Secretariat. And upon his return to Sri Lanka, he has been involved with some companies and organizations, and was also an advisor to the Prime Minister. And it was just a little over a year ago that he was appointed as Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So it's with much pleasure that we invite Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, who I might mention as he's walking up, was also a rugby player of great repute, representing Sri Lanka at one time, not recently, and also played first-class cricket. So he's not a dull jack.
Guest of honor, Professor K.K. Y.W. Pereira, Engineer Javilal Meegoda, the President of the IESL, Engineer Professor Mrs. N. Ratnayaka, President-elect of the IESL, the cream of the engineering profession in this country, ladies and gentlemen. I must first start by making an apology. Unfortunately, I've been called away to a very urgent meeting, and therefore, shortly after I finish these remarks, you must forgive me as I take your leave. So that please accept my apologies. But it's been a great honor and a great privilege to be here with you today. And I must thank your President and the Council for inviting me to participate in this induction and graduation ceremony of the IESL. Before I go any further, I must congratulate the chartered engineers, the associate members and graduates for whom today is clearly a major landmark. And I hope at the end of my remarks, all of you who are at the front end of your careers will feel somewhat more optimistic about the future prospects of the country as a whole and about the prospects for the engineering industry as well. Because what I'm proposing to do in the 15 minutes or so that I have for my remarks is to give you a thumbnail sketch of the government's plans to stabilize the economy, to set up a new growth model, to strengthen the growth framework, and also give you a flavor of some of the major development programs. And then to finish by trying to distill from what I say about the topics I've just listed, the prospects it holds for the engineering profession. How the importance of the engineering profession is going to be embedded in many of the government's projects and programs going forward. So that's roughly the outline of what I want to talk to you about. So let me start by addressing a few remarks on how the government is planning to stabilize the economy. Historically, if you look back over the last 30, 40 years, Sri Lanka has had repeating cycles of stop-go policies. We have rising inflation, balance of payments pressure, very high interest rates, then we slam on the brakes and the economy slows down, and we have a repeating cycle of this happening again and again. If you look back over 30, 40 years, from the time the economy was liberalized in 77, you will see these repeating cycles. And the underlying cause for this has consistently been the government budget. The government has not been able to manage the public finances well. It has had large fiscal deficits, which has pumped excess demand into the system. That excess demand pushes up inflation. That excess demand leaks into unsustainable amounts of imports, puts pressure on the balance of payments, puts pressure on the currency. So until we get the budget deficit into good order, clearly it's not going to be possible to stabilize this economy. You see, if you caricaturize the Sri Lankan economy over the last 30, 40 years, it's been a high budget deficit, high inflation, high interest rate, overvalued exchange rate economy. That is diametrically the opposite of what has happened in the successful countries of East and Southeast Asia, which were able to have disciplined budgets, which meant they were able to contain inflation, which meant they were able to have low and stable interest rates, and they were able to have competitive and stable exchange rates. As I said, we've done exactly the opposite, and which is why we were second to Japan on almost any socioeconomic indicator at the time of independence. And now if you look around second to Japan in Asia, I should say. Now if you look around, other than Afghanistan, Myanmar, one or two other countries, there are very few countries behind us. Everybody else has overtaken us. And so clearly we need to, can't have business as usual. So what is it that we need to do differently? So in terms of stabilizing the economy, the government is putting in place 3 frameworks. One is, it has a fiscal consolidation program, a revenue-based, largely revenue-based, revenue enhancement-based fiscal consolidation program, because our revenue had fallen quite drastically. So the idea is to build up revenue and to bring the budget deficit down to about 3.5% of GDP. The target for this year is 4.6, but that could be exceeded for good reasons, because the government is having to spend more money on drought relief and flood relief. But still, for the moment anyway, the fiscal consolidation is broadly on track. And that has to be kept on track, because if we don't do that, we fall back into the same mistakes that we've made over the last 30, 40 years. So fiscal consolidation, largely revenue enhancement based, is critical. As far as the central bank is concerned, we are putting in place 2 frameworks. Monetary policy. On monetary policy, we are going into what is known as an inflation targeting, a flexible inflation targeting regime. What that means is we will have we do already have an inflation target of keeping inflation between 4 and 6%. And interest rates will be set to keep inflation within that range. Now, it takes 6 to 12 months for a movement in interest rates to pass through the system completely. So we have to set interest rates today for what we think inflation is going to be 6, 12 months down the road. So in future, monetary policy will have to be much more forward-looking and much more proactive. In the past, we have tended to do too little, too late, and then suddenly we had to spike interest rates up to slam on the brakes. So in the future, the idea is to be proactive and to have much smoother cycles in interest rates. Rather than, in the past, we've had interest rates going up to 17, 18%. We want to avoid that and to keep it at a much more steady and stable level. There will be cycles, but they will be more less volatile cycles than they have been in the past, if we do our job properly. Then on the exchange rate, historically, we've always had an overvalued exchange rate because our inflation has tended to be high, which means our costs are going up faster than those of our competitors and trading partners. And the only way you can compensate for that, there are two ways. One is to depreciate the currency, and two is to increase productivity. Now, productivity increases are not easy, and also the inflation differential has been relatively high, and therefore you couldn't drive productivity enough to make up for it. So we needed to have depreciated the currency. But in the past, what we tried to do was to hold the currency stable by spending our scarce foreign reserves. And we've had instances in the past where in 2011, 2012, we spent about $4 billion of our reserves to try to defend the currency and eventually had to depreciate by 15%. In 2015, under the present regime, we spent $2 billion to defend the currency and in the end depreciated by 10%. So it's a complete no-brainer to try to defend the currency by depleting your scarce resources, particularly if most of your reserves are borrowed reserves in the first place. So we want to get away from that, and we will have a more flexible exchange rate policy. And if we can keep inflation steady at, as I said, between 4 and 5% or so, then the pressure on the exchange rate will be relatively less, and hopefully that means the pressure on the currency will be relatively less. So these are the kind of three frameworks around which the macroeconomic policy making will take place. And if we are able to be successful, hopefully we will be able to have stronger macroeconomic fundamentals, which is really the base, the foundation on which any economy operates. The government is also trying to supplement these stabilization measures by creating a new growth model and to strengthen the growth framework. So what is the new growth model? It's not rocket science. It's something that many countries have done in the past, and that is an export-led growth strategy, a private sector-led growth strategy with exports and investment, including foreign investment as the key pillars. Now, why do I say a private sector-led strategy? I've been a public servant all my life. I don't believe that the private sector is the panacea for all ills. In fact, you can get very good development outcomes. If you look around the world, you can get very good development outcomes with different mixes of the state and the private sector. You have the China and the Vietnam at one end and much more market-oriented economies at the other. But in our case, the government does not have the money to drive the development process. We have basically maxed out on our credit card. So given the debt dynamics of the government at the moment, they can't drive the development process. So the private sector has to be the main engine of growth in the economy. Of course, the government will play a role, and there are PPPs, there are some infrastructure projects where the government will have to come in, and we'll have to go down the PPP route, particularly BOTs, given the lack of resources. But this is a purely pragmatic conclusion one needs to reach about the private sector having to drive development because the government simply does not have the money. Then why do we say exports and FDI as exports? Because if you have a market basically of 21 million people, with purchasing power based on per capita income of about $3,800, you can't sustain the 6-7% growth that Sri Lanka now needs as a highly aspirational society. We have a rising middle class, which have quite trenchant aspirations. To meet those aspirations, we have to achieve 6-7% growth. As we've seen in the past, when we're not able to meet the aspirations of our people, then we get social and political instability. We've had 2 youth insurrections in the south, a separatist conflict in the north. For me, there's complex causality behind all those events, but for me, the main causal factor has been the fact that we have not been able to meet the aspirations of our people, particularly our young people. So we need to create the right type of jobs, high-value jobs for our young people, and for that we need to drive growth at about 6 to 7%. And for that, you can't do it by selling only into a market or predominantly into a market of 21 million people. So we have to have exports, and whether your countries are as large as China or as small as Singapore, they've all had to drive their growth process through export expansion. So that has to be a priority. And also, if you look at experience in the successful countries of East and Southeast Asia, foreign direct investment has played a major role. It not only complements domestic capital, it fills the savings investment gap, it also brings in know-how, it brings you market access. So while one needs to create the environment to boost domestic investment, one has to also attach a priority to bringing in FDI. Interestingly, empirical evidence around the world says that domestic investment takes off before FDI comes in, unless you have a massive domestic market like China or India, or you have strategic raw materials like oil or uranium or something like that, then you will get investment. But otherwise, domestic investment takes off before FDI comes, because the domestic investors know when the investment climate is right before anybody else. So one of the most disappointing aspects of the post-conflict narrative over the last 7-8 years has been the performance of investment, both domestic and foreign. Because usually at the end of a conflict, you get a spike in investment. We had a spike in public investment, much of it financed by foreign commercial borrowing, but private investment, both domestic and foreign, has been disappointing. So the challenge for us as policymakers is to create the confidence, to get the kind of sentiment in the domestic private sector for them to open their wallets and invest. And as I said, if we're able to achieve some of the policies in terms of some of the frameworks in terms of macroeconomic stabilization, that will help. And to get this growth model that I've just talked about, we need to strengthen the investment climate, investment promotion, trade facilitation, and trade policy. Let me quickly talk about each of those. On the strengthening the investment climate, the government has set up 8 task forces on the different pillars of the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. And these task forces comprise the various government agencies involved with each pillar. And the idea is to deregulate. If you have 6 steps now, can you bring it down to 4 or 3? If you can use technology to facilitate things around that pillar, how can one do that? So that process is ongoing. The program was launched formally in May of this year, so that's going ahead to try to improve the investment climate. On investment promotion, the BOI is being revamped. The idea is to have a much more focused investment promotion strategy to identify some subsectors where we can have a competitive advantage and focus just on those, and within those subsectors to target particular anchor investors. For instance, in Vietnam, Samsung accounted for 40% of their exports in the early stages. In Costa Rica, Intel accounted for 75% of their export at their early stages of their export transformation. So if you can get 4 or 5 anchor investors to come, you can transform your export performance. And that's what the new strategy is going to be. Identify the subsectors where we have a comparative advantage. Within that, who can we attract as anchor investors to kickstart this process of FDI and export expansion. On trade facilitation, there's a lot being done in terms of for reducing transaction costs in terms of the cross-border movement of goods and services. The customs have pretty much got the single electronic window going, and there are other measures also to promote trade facilitation. Trade policy is controversial, complex, but also if we do it right, it can yield enormous benefits. So what are some of the things the government is doing? Well, if you're going to negotiate trade agreements and liberalize some of the sectors, you have to have an anti-dumping law. Because clearly we have to protect our domestic producers against dumping on the back of any liberalization that takes place. So there's an anti-dumping bill in Parliament. It needs to be pushed through, and that's the first line of defense as we move to a more liberal trade environment. Secondly, there is a trade adjustment package being worked out. And there the objective will be to provide assistance to domestic producers, to domestic enterprises in sectors which are going to be subjected to increased competition through imports for them to improve their competitiveness, as well as to train workers. Workers who are in these affected industries would also be given training to upgrade their skills or else to retrain to go into other sectors. So there is a trade adjustment package. The government is working with the World Bank and the International Trade Center in Geneva to put together this trade adjustment package. Now, arguably the most controversial and possibly the most beneficial aspect of the government's trade-related policies are these trade agreements that are being, or at least I should say economic partnership agreements that are being negotiated. And